Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. And last night we had a big election with a result that a lot of people don't like. And I guess even more like it because more people voted for the guy. But I read an interesting piece this morning in Reason Online, and I got the piece's author on today. He's a senior editor at Reason, and the piece is called Trump Has Many Grudges. Now he has a chance to act on them. Jacob Sullum, welcome back to the show. I don't know if you remember being here, but you were a while back.
I do remember. Thanks for having me back.
So, really, how worried are you that Trump is going to be going after his enemies and enacting policies that are dangerous for the average citizen?
Fairly worried, I guess. I think a lot of the warnings about Trump were overwrought. It's not the end of the republic, it's not the end of democracy, but a second term for him will pose challenges for anybody who's concerned about the rule of law and civil liberties. So part of this is his longstanding authoritarian impulses, which go back to before he got involved in politics. Um, One of the consistent things about his views is that he tends to be, I guess he would describe it as tough on crime or in favor of law and order. But if you listen to what he says about police accountability, from his point of view, what that means is it's better that cops be free to break the rules. They shouldn't have to worry about consequences when they violate people's rights because that deters them from doing their job. He takes a similar view of the presidency when he made this argument about immunity from criminal prosecution for former presidents. It was a very broad argument, basically saying that as long as he's doing anything that could be described as an official act, he can't be held criminally liable after he leaves office. And the Supreme Court accepted much of that argument. They said that when it comes to official acts, there's at least a presumption of immunity. And when it comes to acts that are central to the office of the presidency, there's total immunity. So that sort of meshed with Trump's general attitude. And this is one of the things that's going to be different in the second term is that he does not have to worry about things like communicating with the Justice Department. This is an area that the Supreme Court explicitly said is beyond criminal liability. In that case, it involved discussions with the Justice Department about investigating allegations of vote fraud in the 2020 election. Part of the case against him, the federal case that said he illegally tried to overturn the results of the election, was that he pressured people in the Justice Department to validate his complaints to say there is legitimate cause for concern. We're conducting an investigation, which they resisted. And the Supreme Court said that sort of thing is beyond the criminal justice system. That this is central to the president's function as chief law enforcement officer. He's in charge of the Justice Department ultimately. So when it comes to things like prosecuting or at least investigating his political opponents in the second term, he does not need to worry that any of that could result in criminal charges. So that's pretty troubling because that's one of the main ways that you can make life difficult for your political opponents is by encouraging the Justice Department to investigate somebody, possibly bring charges against them. And even if the prosecution is not successful, the process in itself is a punishment. So if you look at what Trump has said many, many times explicitly about what he would like to do to his opponents, he wants them arrested. He wants them criminally charged. He wants them sent to jail or prison. He's even suggested military tribunals might be appropriate. And who is he talking about when he says these things? He's talking about people who piss him off, basically, but it's a long list. So it includes really anyone who supported his second impeachment, but especially Liz Cheney, because she was a Republican, and especially members of the House Select Committee that investigated the Capitol riot. He has said they're guilty of treason. They should go to jail. He is still angry about the supposed conspirators who supposedly cheated him out of his reelection in 2020. And he has said he wants, if he can, I'm not sure that this is even remotely feasible, but he wants to prosecute them. He also wants to prosecute anybody that he thinks has engaged in fraud in this election. He has talked about all of the people who have targeted him, either at the federal level or the state level, with the various investigations. Now, some of these complaints, I think, are legitimate in the sense that the New York case where he was convicted of 34, famously convicted of 34 felonies, it was basically a bullshit case. I mean, this was relied on a very iffy legal theory involving interacting state and federal statutes. And basically what Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, was trying to do is convert a payoff that Trump made to Stormy Daniels, keep her mouth shut during the election campaign in 2016 about having sex with him. He was trying to convert that payment, which is not inherently criminal, into a bunch of state felonies by way of a statute that deals with bookkeeping. If you create fraudulent business records, it's ordinarily a misdemeanor, but if you can tie it to other crimes through other statutes, it can be converted to a felony, and that's what Bragg did. And it was really unfortunate that case was brought to begin with, but especially that it was the only case, the criminal case, to go to trial against Trump, because it created this impression that every criminal allegation against him was similarly either a stretch or just totally lacking in a solid legal basis. And I don't think that's true. If you look at the federal indictments, Trump very clearly, I think, committed obstruction of justice in the documents case when he resisted the subpoena. I don't know that he actually endangered national security by taking all these files. It's hard to say without actually knowing exactly what was in them, and we can't know that because it's classified, right? But the general attitude that these are my files, I'm going to take them with me, I don't care what the law says, and it applies to the stuff that wasn't classified as well. He took huge amounts of material with him because he thought, this is my stuff. It wasn't his stuff, and it's like if he had taken all the furniture from the White House and said, this is my stuff, I'm taking it. It's the same sort of thing. And that attitude really, I think, should trouble people, beyond the question of national security. But then once the government tried to get those records back, which were government records, he dragged his feet, he resisted, and it's pretty clear he deliberately defied a federal subpoena, and he hid files away. So that was a pretty solid case. And the election interference case alleged violations of law. It wasn't just that he said, oh, I really won. It wasn't just that he made up these charges of systematic fraud, but that he pushed it so far that it became illegal interference with the election. And there are several statutes they cite. Now, you may or may not buy that argument, but I think that's a much more solid case than the New York case. Another case that he's mad about, I think justifiably so, was the civil fraud case in New York, where a judge approved a huge disgorgement order, hundreds of millions of dollars, based on fraud, which was probably technically fraud in the sense that Trump misrepresented his wealth, which he's always been doing. He's been doing that since day one. But the real question is, who was harmed and how were they harmed? And that was, the case didn't really have much to say about that. It was enough under New York law to show that he had misrepresented his assets in paperwork with insurers and with bankers. Whether they actually suffered a loss as a result is a separate question. The number in hundreds of millions of dollars was totally disconnected from any actual damages. The state did not have to prove damages in order to get that disgorgement order. So I think he's justifiably mad about that. But the point is that whoever's crossed him, whether it's for good reasons or bad, he wants them arrested. So he says specifically about the judge in the fraud case and about New York's attorney general who brought the case that they should be arrested. He has said that special counsel Jack Smith, who obtained the federal indictments, also should be arrested supposedly because he illegally leaked information. He has said that Alvin Bragg should be arrested. Right, so all of those people. And then you have, of course, news outlets that offend him, either because they cover him in a way that makes him look bad, which honestly, if you cover Trump completely accurately, you're still going to make him look bad. So, in some cases, he may have a more legitimate complaint about the way he was covered, but so what? Like, the First Amendment protects the right of those news outlets to cover him however they choose. And that's something he fundamentally does not either understand, either he doesn't understand it or he doesn't care about it. So he has said news outlets should have to pay him damages. So this is either for defamation, that's the usual threat. You wrote something I didn't like, I'm going to sue you. And I wish I could change, he said this repeatedly, I wish I could change the defamation laws so that it was easier for me to recover damages in cases like that. He has said he would like to take away the broadcast licenses from news outlets that do things he does not like. So that might include biased coverage of him, or it might include being too easy on Kamala Harris. Either way, he says, that they shouldn't be allowed to use the so-called public airwaves. And most recently, he filed a lawsuit seeking $10 billion in damages under a Texas law that's aimed at business fraud. And the argument was that CBS, by editing an interview with Harris to make her look smarter than she actually is, violated this law. Again, this is a law it's aimed at unfair business practices that victimize consumers. And his argument in that case is, well, viewers were misled, and that's not right. But again, he's trying to convert constitutionally protected speech into an offense that justifies either regulatory penalties or civil damages or jail in the extreme, or loss of your broadcast license, another kind of regulatory penalty. So all this stuff is troubling. Some of it is going to be impossible to accomplish legally, but there are levers that he has as president that he could use to retaliate against his opponents.
Yeah, but here's the argument that people make. They say he's always had this type of rhetoric. He speaks in hyperbole. I heard somebody say that this guy wakes up exaggerating. Like, I mean, before he was elected in 2016, he was saying lock her up. They were chanting it at his rallies about Hillary Clinton. But then once he got in office, he didn't do that. So they extrapolate from that and say, well, he's not going to do that now. That was just his rhetoric. Why don't you think that's a sound argument?
Well, I think several things are different now. One of them I already mentioned, which is the Supreme Court ruling about presidential immunity, which shields a lot of the things that he might do to punish his opponents. Another one is the sort of advisors that he's likely to have around him in his second term. The first time around, a lot of his subordinates were people with much more experience and much more sense. And they, in several cases, stopped him or discouraged him from doing things that they said were illegal or unconstitutional. When it came to taking away broadcast licenses, for example, the head of the FCC said, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. And, under me, the FCC, under my chairmanship, the FCC is never going to do that. He will have a chance to appoint a new chairman of the FCC. as president. So that could change. When it comes to people inside the White House or in his cabinet, he is likely to choose the people who are disinclined to challenge his worst instincts, right? So I don't know if this is true, but supposedly one of the main lawyers who was involved in trying to overturn the election results is a contender for White House counsel. We know for a fact that his vice president is a guy who is not inclined to challenge him, even when he's doing something that's unconstitutional, in contrast with Mike Pence. You know, you may recall Mike Pence was under a lot of pressure leading up to the certification of Biden's victory in 2020 to intervene in that process, even though he did not legally have any authority to do that. Trump wanted him either to outright reject Biden's slates from certain states, or at least send them back to the state legislatures to resolve a supposed dispute about which were the legitimate electors. And Pence repeatedly resisted that and publicly said, you know, I'm not going to do that. I don't have the authority to do that. And later he said, you know, that Trump had asked him to subvert the Constitution and that was wrong. But Vance was asked about, you know, what would you have done in that situation? And he said he would have been fine intervening, would have been fine doing what Trump wanted, and that he would have let, you know, the state legislatures sort it out. So if that's indicative of the sort of people who are going to surround Trump in a second term, that's really troubling. That he's less likely to have people who are going to say, you know, you can't do that. He doesn't like being told that. So he's having had the experience in his first term. He's likely to choose people who are not inclined to do that. And of course, he doesn't have to worry about re-election this time around. This is another consideration, right? So if you overtly target your political opponents, that might hurt your prospects of re-election. He doesn't have to worry about that. Republicans, it looks like, will control the Senate and maybe also the House. So he has less to worry about on that score. So I just think that overall, he's going to have more freedom to do what he's inclined to do without worrying about whether it's legal or constitutional.
So you mentioned that he has an abundance of policies that should be disturbing to libertarians. What are some of the policies that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, aside from all these things that relate to, you know, retaliating against his enemies in various ways, which, you know, includes potential First Amendment violations, I think the two big things are the tariffs. You know, he wants to impose wide and heavy tariffs on goods generally, and then even more so on goods from China. He has talked about a wide range of rates, but they're all insane. And he still seems to think, oh, this punishes these other countries that I don't like, or this will help, you know, U.S. businesses. But in fact, that cost is borne by either domestic producers who use, you know, intermediate goods to produce stuff in the U.S., or by consumers, mostly by consumers. So this is a tax on U.S. businesses and on U.S. consumers. It's something he refuses to acknowledge. And if it provokes retaliation, as it is likely to do, you know, judging from the experience last time around when he was president, it could be economically disastrous for U.S. businesses as well as U.S. consumers. That's really bad. Again, as always with Trump, you don't know whether he's serious. You don't know, even if he is serious, if he's actually going to try to do it. But the president does have very wide discretion under current law to impose tariffs. And this also figures into ways that he could punish his enemies, because the executive branch has wide authority not only to impose these tariffs, but also to say who is exempt from them under special circumstances. So businesses that apply for these exemptions, this is a pretty opaque process. it's an easy way for Trump to favor the people who he thinks are his friends and to punish people that he views as his enemies. And then the other major thing, again and again, we don't know if he's really going to do this, is mass deportation of like all, what is it, 11, 13 million unauthorized U.S. residents. It's insane in practical terms. I think it would be disastrous, obviously, for them. And these are people who, for the most part, are living peacefully and productively in this country. Yes, they're breaking the law in the sense that they don't have official permission to be here. But the solution to that, I think, is to find a way to expand legal immigration, legal residence, so that you don't have this problem of it all being, under the table or behind closed doors. Bring it out into the open and regularize it. His solution is exactly the opposite, and this would result in, obviously a huge human cost in terms of breaking up families that include both, unauthorized residents and either legal citizens or legal residents. It would be hugely problematic for employers. It would be problematic for, it would be problematic for Social Security. They during the campaign, the Republicans talked about how somehow immigrants are a drain on these entitlement programs. It's exactly the opposite. Yeah. Because if you can't actually access the Social Security benefits, which generally they can't, they're not supposed to, and they generally can't, you're paying into the system and you're not drawing out of it. Plus, these people tend to be younger and younger workers paying into the system that's supporting people who are older and retired. So it's bad in that sense. It's bad in terms of the businesses who rely on all of these immigrants. So construction, agriculture, things like that, restaurants, right? It's bad for consumers who, it's bad in terms of the demand that the immigrants bring to the market, which benefits businesses. So I think that would be a huge mistake. It would be just directly enormously expensive to try to actually do that. So, I think those are the two main things, the tariffs and the immigration stuff. And again, with the immigration, actually both of those things, these are longstanding positions of his. So we take him to be sincere about this stuff. Yeah. So he didn't arrive at these positions when he suddenly decided to run for president. If you look back over several decades, he's been consistently hostile toward international trade and consistently hostile toward immigration. And so in terms of policy, I think those are the two main things to worry about.
So on Twitter, or I guess it's X now, there are an abundance of libertarians who are pretty excited. They think that Trump is going to pardon Ross Ulbricht. They think that Trump is going to give Ron Paul a position in the Department of Government Efficiency. They think he's going to maybe eliminate the income tax. Now, to me, this is just the height of gullibility. I mean, they say things like we're partnering with Trump. You're doing no such thing. You're simping for him, and you have no idea if he's going to do any of these things. But that's just my view. I'm curious what your view is. Are you aware of this dynamic that's taking place?
Yes, I have to say it's puzzling to me. Trump is not fundamentally libertarian in any way. He takes some positions that appeal to libertarians. So to the extent that he's anti-interventionist, and that's questionable, that's good from a libertarian perspective. To the extent he's inclined, to reduce taxes, also good, except he wants to increase taxes through the tariff. And if you cut taxes without any compensating spending cuts, you're just contributing to the enormous, national debt, which has to be addressed, but he's not going to address it. Harris wouldn't have either. So I'm not sure, I think between the two of them, the analysis suggests that he's going to add more to the debt than she would have, but both of them would have added enormous amounts to the debt. If he could pardon Ross Ulbricht and for that matter, every nonviolent drug offender in federal prison on day one if he wanted to. So let's see if he does that. He has, plenary power to do that. He doesn't need permission from anybody. So if time goes by and he's not doing that, I think that will be an early signal that he's full of shit. And he was just saying what he needed to pander to that particular group of people. Look, it would be great if he did that. He did issue some commutations, not very many, when he was in office. Certainly not many compared to the huge number that Obama issued. He did, but he didn't do it in a sensible or systematic way. He just kind of pardoned the people who came to his attention that a famous person told him about a particular prisoner, and therefore he intervened. It's better that person be free than not be free, right? But it would be nice if there were a more orderly process for considering these cases and for resolving this huge backlog of applications for commutations. He could do that, but I don't think he is consistent and maybe not even sincere enough to follow through on that. We'll see. That's one area where he definitely could make significant progress if he really wanted to. And in terms of the other things, I just don't believe that he is seriously committed, to cutting government spending, because he's never proposed anything serious in that area. So you might say he's going to bring in libertarians or libertarian-leaning people who are going to, I don't know what, reduce fraud, waste, and all that. That's not what it is. It's about making big cuts in discretionary spending, first of all, and also fundamentally reforming entitlement programs. And he's explicitly opposed to that. That's the real problem that's hanging over our heads right now. Very soon, within a decade, there will be mandatory Social Security cuts, 20%. That's unavoidable unless something is done. And he's already said he doesn't want to do anything. So how can you take him seriously as a fiscal conservative?
I don't.
Regardless of who he says he plans to appoint.
Yeah. Now you said the first sign of bullshit, but we've got bullshit from this guy, not just for the last 8-9 years, but for decades. He's a known philanderer. He's a known liar. And we know his lack of civility in public. People know what he did in 2020. And yet he's still elected. Why? Right. Do you have any guess how? I mean, is it just that Kamala is that bad?
Well, she's pretty bad. So I wouldn't discount that. The general theory, which I think is plausible, is that it's a way of saying fuck you to the establishment. Voting for Trump is. And doesn't mean you necessarily agree with him. It doesn't necessarily mean you think he's a fine human being. So I think that's true. But then you have to think of what you get when you elect somebody with these really deplorable character traits. I mean, when you point out that Trump lies all the time, the response is, well, politicians lie. We know that. But even for a politician, he lies a lot, and he always has, even before he got into politics. And at a certain point, people become accustomed to that. So it's not even striking to them anymore. Oh, he lied again? Like every time he opens his mouth, practically, he's saying something that's not true. Now, sometimes he might sincerely believe it. It's still hard to tell what he actually believes about 2020 election. But for sure, he's saying things that aren't true all the time. And for me, it always struck me about him, even though I've been following politicians for a long time, and I know that all politicians, lie to some extent. He was really exceptional in that way. And the real breaking point for me was what he did after the election, is that initially he was watching the returns. And, what happens on election night is that sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, sometimes you're up and then you're down, and then you're up again. That always happens. But he immediately interpreted that as a sign that there must have been fraud going on. And then everything followed from that because he knew he couldn't have been rejected by voters, right? At his core, he started with that conviction. So knowing that, the only explanation had to be systematic fraud, and the exact details did not matter. So any allegation that he heard of, he was prepared to endorse, regardless of whether there was any evidence for it. And I thought, it can't possibly go on for that long. Like eventually he'll come to his senses, he'll accept reality. He never accepted reality, never. To this day. Just like last week, he was saying, I shouldn't have left the White House because I actually won. And he might sincerely believe that. I'm not sure which is more troubling, whether he actually believes it, in which case he's so delusional that he can't be trusted with even being dog catcher, let alone president, or he's just such a liar and so arrogant that he's willing to stick to this preposterous story even 4 years later. And to me, that was like, if you want to go along with him, you have to live in a different reality, right? Like that's not reality. It's not. It's not true. And that really bothered me, especially because it was about such a big thing, like who was the president now. Like it was kind of a big deal. So, and the fact that so many people went along with it, either because they actually believed him or because they were afraid to challenge him, was really disturbing. And then it ultimately led to this riot, which I don't think he intended the riot, but it was perfectly foreseeable in those circumstances that some of those people that he was riling up by talking about the stolen election were going to go beyond, peacefully and patriotically marching, like he said. It was perfectly foreseeable. It was utterly reckless. It completely justified his second impeachment. And he should have been convicted by the Senate, in which case we would not be talking about this now. That was their chance. Yeah. And lots of Republicans thought that he had gone way too far, including Mitch McConnell, and that this was unforgivable. And they figured, given this huge scandal, his political career is over. They were wrong. They were wrong to think that it would be handled either by the civil courts or by the criminal justice system. I explained this at the time. No one listened to me, but at the time I said, don't expect that if you don't convict him, it'll be handled in some other way, because there are all sorts of problems, as we've seen, with trying to pursue those cases. And so that was the best chance. And then you get things like this prosecution in New York State, which, like I said, was I thought absurd, but very plainly, people are desperate. Democrats especially are desperate to stop him from being president again, and they're willing to bend the law in order to do that.
See, you mentioned the alternate reality you have to live in if you're going to go with him, and that in many ways disturbs me more than him as president. I find him often comical, the ridiculous things he says, but the willingness of so many people, citizens, to go along with that alternate reality, to believe the nonsense that he puts out there, I just think it's unbelievable to me. I would have never thought that could happen. But and then there's this, I don't know if it's caused by Trump or if it's just correlated with Trump, but there's definitely a breakdown in civility, in just being decent to people, and the willingness, when I see on social media, of people to just swear at people, call people morons and idiots, and post just horrendous things about people and horrendous memes and photos. It seems to me, and I don't know, maybe you'll differ with me, that the years of political correctness and the left calling anybody who you wanted to cut taxes, for instance, is a racist, or if you think affirmative action's bad, you must be a racist, you're a sexist, you're this, you're that. It seems like there's been such a reaction to that's gone beyond just fighting against it, but that's like, you know what? It's just it's a free for all. We're all just going to be uncivil, and I think that's horrible for society.
I agree. Um, I've been, a journalist for a long time, and I always got hate mail. But since Trump came around, um, it's been notably worse. Um, and what I get it from both sides, right? So um, if I write something that is at all critical of Trump, even if I'm actually defending him in that particular case, like I've written things saying, you claim Trump said X, Y, and Z, but if you go and look at it in context, he didn't really say that, and maybe we should just tell the truth. Like the truth is bad enough. Why do you have to
Yeah.
make stuff up? And when I write something like that, I get hate mail from both sides. So uh, the people who support him accuse me of having Trump derangement syndrome,
Oh, geez.
even though I'm actually, if anything, arguing against that. I'm arguing against exaggeration. Um, and that's those are the nice ones. If all that's all they say, they call you names and they threaten you and stuff like that. Um, one guy called me an asshole, but he wouldn't like actually type it out. Like it's surprisingly genteel for somebody who's prepared to call a stranger an asshole based on something he wrote. He used like dollar signs instead of the S's, which I thought was really kind of surprising from somebody like that. He's prepared to call me an asshole, but he's not prepared to type it out. And from the other side too, I will say, in response to the same sort of article where I'm on the one hand saying, Trump didn't really say this, but on the other hand, he said lots of other stuff that really was bad. I get uh, emails from Harris supporters or from Trump opponents who say, this is really irresponsible of you to even suggest that a negative things that was said about Trump is not accurate. Um, how dare you? We all know what he really meant. We can hear the dog whistles, that sort of thing. And basically that I'm contributing to the destruction of the republic and the end of democracy. Right. So I get that. I get that from both sides, which I like to think tells me I'm doing my job right. But the polarization is disturbing, not just in the sense that it requires you to choose like which reality you're going to live in, but that people automatically attribute to you views that you don't necessarily hold just based on the thing that you said having to do with Trump. If you said a bad thing about Trump, they know everything about you. They know who you are, right?
Yeah.
If you said a positive thing, which don't do that often, but sometimes I say, oh, look, I did defend him when it came to the criminal case in New York. I said that I wrote at length about that and how this was bullshit. Um, right. So if I do something like that, the people on the other side, say that's terrible. Of course, you should go to prison. Um, yeah. So yeah. And they often will assume, yeah, the people on the other side will assume that I'm a Republican, which I have never been in my whole life. And yeah, so I mean, there always is a little bit of that in the communications I got, but it's gotten much worse in recent years, for sure.
That's yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you think we need to discuss about your article or just anything in general you want to say about Trump going forward?
We'll have to keep an eye on him.
A
Fortunately,
lot of eyes.
um, fortunately, the Supreme Court, including the justices that he appointed, despite that ruling, despite the immunity ruling, has shown that it's prepared to stop him in at least some cases when he does things that are beyond his authority. Um, the bump stock ban springs to mind, but that there are other examples as well. You have to comply with the subpoena kind of thing. So there are still checks in the system, But if Republicans control both houses of Congress and they have Trump in the White House, and we're relying on the courts to ultimately stop um, illegal or unconstitutional things from happening, it leaves a lot of room for trouble in the interim. Like before cases are ultimately resolved, he can cause, inflicts a lot of pain on a lot of people. So you just have to, I don't want to prejudge everything he does. Maybe he'll do some good stuff in a second term. He did some good things in his first term. So if he does something good, I'll say it's good. But when he says things that are appalling and wrong, you really have to point it out, and you can't just just react by saying, that's Trump being Trump. You can't take him seriously. It's like he's the freaking president of the United States, right? And so we should never take him seriously. Only sometimes take him seriously. When do we believe that he really means to do what he says he's going to do? Because the libertarians who are, I don't know if I want to say fans of his, but are inclined to support him, they take him at his word. They say he's going to free Ross Ulbricht and whatever else, and that he's going to cut government spending. And they say, oh, you should believe him. That's what he said. But they're also, on the other hand, saying when he says all this awful stuff, oh, don't believe him. He doesn't really mean it, right? So I'm not sure you can consistently maintain those two positions. But we'll have lots of opportunities to find out, I think, the next 4 years.
Yes, we will. All right. Where can people find you?
Reason.com. And I will say it's a really, I'm somewhat biased, but it's a great website in the sense that all of our content, including, the stuff we write on a daily basis, but also the stuff in the magazine, ultimately goes up on the website for free. Subscribers get to see it sooner, which is why they, it's worth paying for it. But it all goes up there when you have a big archive going back to the 60s. That's all free to access. So it's a good resource.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.